My name is Nolan Hack. I'm a black revolutionary from Los Angeles, California.
I'm SeDerrick. I'm a writer in Texas.
Tracy, John.
Yeah, I'm John Kane. I am a Mohawk. I am a radio host and activist and freelance columnist, I guess. And I am always pushing Native issues and pushing back against oppression of anybody.
My name is Tracy. I'm from Nashville, former criminal justice instructor, activist across a wide variety of humanitarian areas.
All right. Speaking of humanitarian areas, topic tonight on the docket is why we have decided to do coalition work with another group, with another race of people, with another gender, whatever, and why we feel it's important and beneficial to partner with said groups, mainly, obviously, on this panel, Black and Indigenous people, Black and Indigenous issues. And I think one thing we could add in, or I think that it's already part of it, is, why did we individually, the four of us on the panel tonight, start doing movement work, start doing coalition work? And I'll just quickly give my spiel. The reason I stand before you today and on this panel doing the work that I do is in July of 2015, I heard the news that 3 different people died because of this state and police violence. Their names were Sarah Lee Circlebear, the Native woman in jail, Paul Castaway, Native man killed by the Denver police, and Sandra Bland, the Black woman killed in a Texas jail. And I'd always known as a Black person that we're still not equal. We're still second class, but I didn't know to the level of how subhuman this country and the system treats us and thinks that we are. And then the other side of the coin, I knew Native people were mistreated. I know the land was stolen, but I had absolutely no idea the lengths it went to and how subjugated Native people still are today. And from that moment on, for me, it was always the both of us are in this together. I know that's rare in the movement. Usually groups, individually marginalized people, they protect each other, not often enough protecting other marginalized groups. But to me, I don't see another option. For one, just because we go through really the same thing in brass tacks, and it's the same hand beating the hell out of us for 5 centuries. But that was my little spiel. So, SeDerrick, Tracy, John, anything you have to say to start us off with the topic tonight?
I'll go first. I think that in our community, at least in the Black community, there's it's very strange. Sometimes you hear people talking about like hypervisibility or like the hypervisibility of the community, and it's kind of clear that they might not understand that there's like another side to that, one that's actually very harmful, and one that in many ways Black people are trying to escape from, or have been trying to escape from since we really got here. I just find that, I found that Black people are very insular. We're very insular people. We have friends and connections with people who are outside of our community, but because our experience is very particular, and I'm actually going to slightly disagree with you, Nolan. Like, I don't think that it's the same thing. I think that I think it's parallel, it's congruent, but it is different, and I think different in like specific ways. And I'm not saying that to say that anything negative. I'm just wanting to give each experience like the respect of kind of being its own unique experience, while still also recognizing that there is like a commonality. I just think I've found that it's much better for me and other people in the community to speak directly to people, because I think that a lot of our time here, at least, like the conversation is being filtered through other means, and that is not helpful, like in any way. It's actually very harmful. And I also just personally, this is just like, I guess, more personal goal. I just feel that the experience of being kind of racialized for these express purposes, whether it's like to justify chattel slavery or like the dispossession of land, in a way, I don't know, that feels more of a genuine commonality than what I feel for, I don't know, George Washington or anything else. I'm not saying that that's like the only reason that we should partner. I'm just saying that a lot of our relationships, or at least our relationship to like this institution, is not technically, like not even technically, it's like it's not consensual. It's not consensual, so we run into a lot of issues with that. We struggle in school, like, because we learn history that's not relevant to us. And I just feel that we need to invest more time in building relationships outside of whatever this structure is, to ultimately see a different result. Sorry. I wanted to speak really purposefully, but I understand I'm kind of dragging my words here.
No, that was good. We were talking about Palestine and Israel before we went on, and that kind of, she just said, kind of speaks to that, because we do need to go outside of our own communities, talk to other marginalized groups, even outside of this country, outside of this system. Oh, it's the same system, but outside of this country and the specific government. And to what you were saying about my point, that's why I said brass tacks. To me, at least, at the end of the day, you know, we're still two people under the same thumb, being subjugated because of our race, because of white supremacy. You know, all the names that were called, still called, we're 3/5 of a human being. You know, what's in the Declaration of Independence, what's said about Native people in that document. That's all I was saying. But there are a lot of differences, just like there are a lot of similarities. But I can definitely agree with you there, SeDerrick. And Tracy, John, you have any thoughts on this?
Go ahead, John.
All right, I'll go next. All right. Well, first off, Nolan, I don't know if you've got your speakerphone on or something, but somewhere
that echo.
SeDerrick. Yeah,
I do hear that.
Okay. All right. Just want to mention that. All right. I mean, part of the thing is, we face racism, but as I even mentioned in my takeaway interview, the racism is unique as it applies to different peoples. And so while I agree with SeDerrick, we aren't hit with the exact same thing. It may be some of the same cause, the dehumanization, racism, and that kind of thing. But really, when you look at how it has been applied to people who have, in many ways, different circumstances. I mean, slavery was something that obviously laid at the origins of the dehumanization of black people. Basically, we were a people in the way, and so the way that treatment began, even though it was dehumanizing to both of us, it was done differently. So our experiences are in many ways unique as we look at what that oppression has looked like, but we still have shared that notion of being an oppressed people. So I think that's the reason that we should come together, because even within our own groups, so to speak, there is such diverse thought. I mean, I talk oftentimes about this idea of assimilation, or we talk about the Kanye West and the Uncle Tom stuff. We have people within our own groups, if you want to call it that, that have diverse thoughts, and sometimes those thoughts can be as damaging as the oppression we get from the dominant culture. But I think this is the reason that those of us who can see what we see should come together. It's not just about strength in numbers. I think it's being able to paint a broader picture of what that oppression looks like, and again, not try to treat oppression against one group as an anomaly. And when you look at what has been the policies of the United States as it's related to all marginalized people, you can demonstrate the diversity in how that oppression is played out. Again, we talked about the Palestinian issue before we started recording here tonight, and what came to mind immediately to me was the border agent shooting a 16-year-old Mexican kid down a hill on the other side of the border wall because he was throwing rocks. I mean, that's Israel firing on Palestinians on the other side of a border fence, and so the idea that somebody thinks or that Americans would be surprised that the White House is standing with Israel, I mean, that's been American policy for over 2 centuries, and as people of color, whether we are on the other side of a Mexican-U.S. fence, or whether we're marginalized in terms of poverty in the urban environment, or marginalized by being stuck off out of the way on a quote-unquote Indian reservation, we are still being targeted for that oppression. And so for me personally, the reason that I'm involved, not only in this group, but involved in what I do, is because I can take that filter off that we were just, SeDerrick talked about. I'll say the things that I think other people are either too shy to say, or trying to be too kind or diplomatic to say. No, some of this stuff is just so outrageous that it's got to be called for what it is, and we can't pull punches. I don't want to soften the blow. I mean, I know people want to sing the praises of this person or that person, and ignore. I mean, what's that expression? They say, "Oh, you can't judge somebody by the worst deeds that they've committed." And I'm thinking, sure you can. Sure you can. I mean, I mean, you can't just judge them solely by their good deeds. I mean, if they're still, Harvey Weinstein or Eric Schneiderman or Bill Cosby. No, you have to assess them for the damage that they can do to another human being. I mean, that's the stuff that you have to look at. So anyway, that's my view. I think that we do need to form coalitions, and we do need to stand together, because we are calling out the same system of oppression, even if it's being applied to us in distinct ways.
Yeah, and there's, with all those differences that we both have in terms of our specific genocides, even put the Palestinian situation and genocide in the conversation, we have to call it out to end it. You know, if you take Morgan Freeman's way of thinking, well, how do you stop racism? You just stop talking about it. You take that view, and you make it worse. Especially since you're telling white people, yeah, you just pretend it doesn't exist, and everything will just magically fix itself. You know, if you have a gash, you know, on your skin and there's this blood coming out, if you're just looking away, you know, it's not going to get fixed. You have to.
Well, and on that note, I mean, I think about when people say, "Oh, there you go, playing the race card." Look, if the governor of the state of New York, Andrew Cuomo, says something that's racist or inappropriate in any way, I think just to say that he's wrong is not a strong enough statement. If he says something that has blatant racial connotations to it, then he's got to be called out for making a racist statement, and that's not playing the race card. That's calling it what it is, and I think the idea that, you know, whether it's Morgan Freeman or anybody else says, "Wow, you guys had to go there. You had to play the race card." Look, if what's playing out is a clear manifestation of racism, you know, by a dominant culture or somebody who is you know, sitting in their, you know, basking in their white privilege, then to me, it's a travesty for us not to call it out.
Yeah. It's amazing when that happens, and people, you even hear people of color say it, as you were alluding to, John. You know, why are you playing the race card? You know, you're always playing the race card. It goes back to then white people inventing the race card and the very concept of race. Though they invent race, they start being racist towards us. And
it's not even a card. I even resent the terminology card, because this is not a game. Like, we're not playing spades, we're not playing blackjack. Like, my politics generally come from trying to figure out what is happening to me. Like, why does the neighborhood that my grandparents live in, why does it look like this? When I go to school, I went to a magnet school. You had to test to get into it. There were like 2 schools that you could send kids to. One was a black school, Judson. That's where my older cousin went. And then the family always tries to do like 2. It tries to take both options. So they sent one of us to that school and then one of us to the other one. Because my older cousins had gone to some of like the poorer schools, and that had not worked out well. And like seeing the contrast between lives, seeing just all of the, I come into my politics from my grandparents and then from trying to figure out what was going on with me. So I just really resent someone making analogies about like it being a game or for play or something I'm only saying to like one up you, or like the experiences that we talk about are real, and like I don't appreciate them being trivialized.
Yeah, I agree with that.
Sorry, Nolan.
I know, Tracy. What's your thoughts on this? I mean, as far as the idea of coming together in you know, to work collaboratively across other groups of marginalized peoples. Where do you what drives you to do it, I guess?
Well, I haven't been very successful in my efforts to reach out and work with other activists. I have gotten a lot of, who are you? I don't know you. I've been doing this work for 10 years. I don't even know your name. That's been a response that I've gotten from a lot of people. And I realize that the movements that are happening now are being led by younger people. And I'm almost 50. So you're not going to know that I was protesting in 1991, 92. And because I don't advertise my name and attach it to what I do, you're not going to hear about the things that I'm doing. A lot of what I do, I don't tweet about it. I don't post it on Facebook. So in terms of trying to come together with other people and other organizations, that's been a lot of the feedback that I've gotten. My efforts haven't been very successful. I believe it's very important to partner with other groups and to be, I don't really like the word ally, but to work together for liberation of everyone.
I really resonated with that because even, and I'm not trying to negate your experience, but I also run into this entire week really. I've seen people on the timeline talking about whether they are for or against, solidarity between different groups. And I do follow people who hold the opposing view, just because I also do want to know what they are thinking. Like, I don't think that all of them are unintelligent people. And I just feel like it's better to have some window, especially if all it is like following them on Twitter and like reading what they are willing to post and share. So I do try to make some space for that. But I do also feel that sometimes folks might have, when people go through trauma, it can be hard to, build trust. My friends who have gone through certain things, like, it's been tough, for us to sometimes form a relationship. That's just like trauma and pain. And I feel like even if the conversations don't start where we're like in perfect agreement, I feel that they will eventually become more similar, basically, just through our conversations. Because I feel that it's imperative for us to have an answer, or like us, I don't know exactly what a final answer to what our experience has been in all of this, or how exactly we navigate the terrain. But I know that like I need to be moving in this direction. And this just, again, it just feels like so much more of a emotionally and legitimate conversation, even when people are disagreeing. And I've seen disagreements between like the two groups, and thought in certain situations that both people were like valid. I don't feel that like solidarity has to mean like perfect agreement. Like, I don't feel that solidarity has to mean like universal popularity. I feel that there's just a lot that we can get done. We just need to have direct conversations, like not through any filter. And Twitter and social media can still be a filter, because you still have to kind of watch what you do and say, but it is better than, I feel, the alternative, especially what's been happening like in the past, and it being pretty much, the conversation pretty much being the dominant power, like using its own narratives to shape its own desires.
It's interesting, Tracy, you brought that up, because I've experienced the same thing. Who are you? What are you trying to do? Where'd you come from? One thing I've gotten a lot of is, what organization are you with? And I just had the thought just now of, what if somebody, because this usually happens, unless you have parents who are in the movement and then you just happen to be in it too as a child and keep doing it, something draws you to it. Whether it's somebody killed by the cops, something happening to you personally, something happening to a family member or a loved one. So you're not going to have any of those quote-unquote credentials. So
well,
you have to
then
be questioned about.
what are those credentials, though? I mean, who decides what credentials are valid versus which ones aren't valid? What I find that now, if there's just so much distrust, there's so much purposeful misinformation, moles, plants, and we are talking about people's lives. So I can understand where some of that comes from, the approach of, for example, there was one person. I can give you a very specific example. I was going to go to a protest. The white supremacists were within 30 minutes of my house having a major rally, and I was going to go. And I was going to get a bus to take some students. We have 2 HBCUs where I live, and I was going to take some students to this march. And someone got in my mentions, who are you? What are you doing? You know, just, it was really very unpleasant. We ended up going into DMs and talking, but they were tweeting on the timeline, well, it's fine if you don't want to talk to me, but we don't know who you are, while we're in DM messaging each other. And I told them who I was, where I went to school, you know, some of my background. And then it became, well, just because you taught doesn't make you an activist. I mean, and it was just really more of a, you know, and their approach with me was, well, my activism work is out there. Anyone can Google me. I don't know you. And it was just really ugly. But the problem is I've gotten that approach several times. So although I've tried to message, tweet at, you know, hey, I'm going to be in the greater D.C. area. I know that's where you are. Hey, would you like to meet up? I've been taken up on that offer once. So when I put myself out there to meet you or meet activists, you're not taking me up on the offer, but conversely, you're questioning who I am.
Right.
Right. So, and I don't know where that's coming from. But, you know, it's not a pleasant experience. I get a lot done working on my own. Excuse me. I'm not on Twitter bragging about it either. I'm not shooting video of myself doing X, Y, Z. Not that there's anything wrong with that. That's just not,
right.
You know, I don't need to be the face of something.
Right.
I'm not branding. I'm not a branded person or anything like that. Don't have to be, don't want to be. But your original statement about something leading you to the movement or leading you to activism, I have so many stories. You don't have enough time in your show. But I do remember at about the age of 8, a movie called The Holocaust came on television. And my mother was a history teacher. And she made us all watch this movie. And I think I was too young to watch that. It was a lot to take in. I was very upset and angry. But I do remember going to the library and getting a book about 3 inches thick on the Holocaust. Way too heavy reading for someone my age, but I did read the book, and that stuck with me. And I've always carried the things that happen to people in the world with me. So, but I think that was the root of making me aware that, holy crap, we live in a terrible world that people let this happen. But my very first protest was in the early 90s when my then best friend, who's now deceased, died. She's dead now, but her son was a toddler and left on a daycare center van. One of the first national stories about children being left on in cars in the summer. And the lady got probation that left him on that van. But there were daycare center workers in Memphis that did the same thing, but they were black, and they went after them with the might of the state to prosecute them, and it made me very angry. And I protested outside the courthouse downtown. So, you know, I've got stories for days, Nolan. I think it's just something you either have it in you to do or you don't.
And I think that a lot of times, I mean, nowadays, like, to really even be able to survive in this economy, especially as a young person, you really do kind of have, I'm not going to say like a brand, but like you have to have some kind of presence. especially I feel like for like poor or disadvantaged folks. I know a lot of people who make money from the internet, like, and they're mostly people of color because they're having to do that because of just the situations we find ourselves in. And so I don't mind that part. I'm not like trying to be or rank anyone necessarily. Like the only real trolls that I argue with are people that I feel are either like white people who are like talking about like African society as though they know, because I grew up around white people like that, like saying this and saying that, and like hadn't read a book on Africa a day in their life. And so if I feel like someone is doing that, like I'll always go after that type of person, just because I've been on the other side of that, and I know the extent to which black people don't learn really anything about African culture or like history unless it's like in their church or within their family. And unfortunately, because of the damage that was just done, that's not sufficient for everybody, especially like if your family may have moved. We obviously have like a longer presence nearer to the Atlantic coast than we do to, well, actually that's not technically true. There were some black people who were brought over like in the 1500s who like I think went to the West Coast, but the majority of us were brought more close to the Atlantic coast, and that's where a lot of the culture is most prevalent, in Louisiana and in South Carolina in particular. And so people just like to pull rank, and the only thing that I'm really gearing towards like on social media, that is, other than like having these conversations, is giving black people their history. Like I don't care who you think I know or that I don't know this person, or who, I just speak what's in my heart. Like I put the history that I feel like is important out there, and I'm just like hoping it finds the right people.
There's like a invisible hierarchy of activism, and only the person trying to impart that invisible hierarchy knows what it is. It's because everyone has a different opinion if they believe in it. And that's why people like Umar Johnson or Tariq Nasheed are popular because of this invisible hierarchy of activism. And there's too many white folks like that.
I don't think that what Umar Johnson or Tariq Nasheed does is activism. I don't even know if Tariq Nasheed has been blocked since I joined Twitter, and then Umar Johnson was blocked shortly thereafter. But I don't follow them. I don't even know if they call themselves activists. I consider them much more like chauvinists.
Oh yeah, but in the perspective of the public, a lot of people consider them activists, especially because they're black and they speak on black issues. But it's interesting you say that, because you have someone like Richard Spencer call himself an activist.
Well, he is an activist. He's an activist for white nationalism.
Well, and then on the Native side of it, I mean, I would say that we see these iconic figures that get elevated mostly by white people, you know, to speak on behalf of Native people, and they become entrenched as these immovable figures, and they say nothing, or they say things in such a way that people will say, "Oh, that's so deep." It reminds me of a Peter Sellers movie called Being There, where he plays this this really retarded kid who was raised in a rich man's mansion. I guess his mother was a maid or something like that, and the media somehow came to believe that he was the advisor to this rich man. And so they kept wanting to interview him, and he would say this most moronic stuff, and people would try to twist it into having meaning. And I see that from some of these iconic Native figures out there. And those are the same ones, as you guys are talking about, that want to pull rank on you when you say something that that perhaps is a little bit too strong for them. And that's what I see. In the battles when you do engage in some of these conversations, some of the people that you find to be your adversaries are not necessarily the white man from the dominant culture. Sometimes it's the people who are perhaps have a bigger microphone or megaphone than you do, representing black or native or whatever else, that you've got to somehow overcome their own the ideology that they're espousing to really make a meaningful conversation out of what the issue at hand is. And I see this over and over again. And so I mean, honestly, that's kind of what I find appealing about about Malcolm X as opposed to, say, Martin Luther King. I mean, Martin Luther King was already being propped up there by he was gaining a lot of support in the white community, and all of a sudden Malcolm X is saying, wait a second here, and this is where you get into the whole house Negro, field Negro thing. I had a lot more respect for some of the messages, not just because he Malcolm X talked about fighting back, but I look at how even the role that the church and politics and everything else has influenced those who claim to have been those activists or those activist voices or those voices that want to claim to represent the oppressed masses, and sometimes I'm a little skeptical of that myself.
I think that the white people who are gravitating towards Martin Luther King were doing so because, especially with the I Have a Dream speech, it's basically a message that it's kind of ambiguous. Like, it's talking about like this dream, like it's not like actual policy or something like that. It's something like kind of ephemeral. And like it's about love. And I guess there were people from the beginning wanting to like manipulate that and to focus so much on love that like we didn't ever like get into like the policy and how we actually go about making like all of these changes. And so I think that that's what those people were doing. But I also just do want to say that at the time he was shot, like Martin Luther King was like, I think the most unpopular person in America, because he had started speaking about Vietnam and stuff like that towards the end of his life. I'm not saying that those criticisms of Malcolm weren't legitimate, and I actually am not a pacifist. I'm not for violence, but I do believe in just self-defense, especially just given all the racial violence history that I've been studying like over the last 2 years. But I don't know. I guess I just didn't want to totally paint Martin. Like, I disagree with some of the approach, but I don't know. He's one of the ancestors. I do respect it, and it does take strength to non-violently walk down the street and like get these dogs set on you, and that is a type of strength. But especially at this point, maybe if it was all right then, because there was this new thing called TV, and like you were bringing that to a massive audience, and that was really a big part of kind of why it was as successful as it was, because there really weren't that many churches and activists involved in the civil rights movement. Like, a lot of the protests were a lot smaller than what people realize, because we only kind of like remember like the bigger stuff. But yeah, sorry.
My criticisms of Martin isn't so much the nonviolent thing, especially since I believe in a lot about myself, not arguing with folks who believe in being militant, because part of me is also militant, and that self-defense part you talked about, SeDerrick. But my issues with him are him earlier on with his work, being too passive in general, trying to coddle white people who are trying to kill him and eventually did. And to your point, SeDerrick, he eventually went past that point of, yeah, okay, yeah, we need to just hold hands and hug and come together, everybody, even though part of that everybody is trying to lynch you. And he figured that out. He said himself, I think we may be integrating into a burning house. And he was killed. That was close to when he was killed. And I'd be remiss to not mention, I know the other R word was dropped, and I know well, in earlier times, that was the clinical definition of mentally challenged, but having a family member who had learning disabilities growing up, I just wanted to mention that.
Yeah, it's not
mentally challenged instead of, the other R word. But yeah, it's funny, Martin and Malcolm, those are, obviously for Black folks, those are the two giants, which I think is also unfair because where are the women? Where James Baldwin does not get talked about enough because he's gay. The fact that Malcolm X is bisexual, nobody ever talks about that. Marsha Johnson, nobody talks about her, transgender Black woman. But
well,
we
know why they weren't talked about at that time, because during that time, like it was not socially acceptable. We want those people to be, I think, more highlighted now. Bringing it back to just kind of like back around to like building coalitions. There were coalitions going on even then. I have a book. Lord, I have to find it. But it was like about like the Brown Power movement, how it like models itself like on the Black Power movement, how they were like taking. There have been like these traditions of coalitionship in the past. I sometimes feel as though, and I'm not blaming anyone in particular for this. I'm actually speaking from the Black community specifically here, but I feel like there may not have been enough of an effort to like have a more sustained conversation, but distance also plays like a big part in that. Like until very recently, it was much more difficult to like organize and communicate cross country, and it can be easy to take for granted that fact for granted, especially like when we live in like the information age where it's just like we're all in different states right now, but we're having this conversation. And that's another thing, like, I don't know, I feel like the technology of this era also is what's making this possible, because even when we can't like physically be in the same place, we can still speak to one another. And I think it's the whole, we remiss not to like try to leverage that, not to try to push past like where we've gotten stuck.
When you talked about it earlier, that communication is so necessary. I remember meeting a couple people a little while back. One was the wife, and the other was the daughter of a man named Ray Robinson. He was a Black man who was an ally of the American Indian movement and helped the resistance at Pine Ridge during that, like it's called Wounded Knee 2. And because of misinformation, because of that distrust, even though there was legitimate, whether it was Black and Native alliances during that time or just straight out Black Panther and American Indian movement alliances, because of mistrust and people saying, oh, he's an informant, he was killed. They don't even know the exact day he died. You can go to his Wikipedia page, Ray Robinson. It says approximately April 25th, late April. And that's sadly the fallout of our double genocide and this dual colonization that they have us under. Since the jump, they've pitted us against each other. along with everybody else. I mean, I remember asking my father when I was young, why do Mexicans and black folks hate each other in the hood? And he told me, well, it's because we're both fighting for scraps. You know, so when you're pushed that far up against the wall, it's hard to help anybody else other than yourself. And I'm just speaking as one group, black folks or whatever marginalized group you come from. It's hard to help anybody else when you're fighting off this huge thing called oppression. And it's a shame, but we need to get past that because we can't go at this alone. We can't get free alone. We can't liberate just ourselves. That's just not going to work. We've all tried it, and we've all failed.
Well, and on that note, I mean, for one thing, I do want to mention that Robinson wasn't the only person killed by AIM for being accused of being an informant. Anime Aquash was also killed by AIM, and that's pretty well established now. But you know, the other thing is that you know, some of those activist groups, you know, like AIM, they became misguided, and they took advantage of the fight that they were in to, you know, some of those guys. I mean, look at all those guys got to be famous, right? They got into movies and everything else. You know, the main figureheads from AIM. And you know, sometimes it's easy to question. Well, you know, did they? You know, what did they accomplish? So I mean, again, we can get into that, but you're right. This idea of trying to assess somebody else's credentials is a challenge, and that's why I think trying to maintain a certain level of integrity, and that integrity does involve defending yourself and defending others. I think the idea of, you know, putting yourself in a situation to be victimized, and that's one of the things that, you know, my criticisms as to what took place at the Dakota Access Pipeline. I mean, there were people who literally went there to be pepper sprayed. I mean, not that they wanted to be, but I mean, they felt like that was their badge of honor. I mean, not dismantle a machine, but go to the front line and get pepper sprayed. And you know, I would never encourage somebody that I cared about, you know, or people that I don't care about to place themselves in harm's way just to prove the other side is capable of harming you. I mean, that's absurd to me. I do have to address something because I didn't even understand what you meant with the R word reference. So let me address that, please. The use of that word, and because perhaps nobody else on the panel understood the movie context that I was talking about. The Peter Sellers character was not disabled. His growth was retarded by the way he was brought up. So my use of the word was not to call him. Yeah. So I'd like you to see the movie sometimes. I read the video because it's interesting how somebody can take somebody who has had their development retarded, literally, and then because they have this belief that they somehow are playing the role of an advisor or something like that, they start to hang on every word, and that was my point with the whole thing. So I did want to clear that up. But no, look. There's a lot that's being said here that, and on SeDerrick's point, I think part of the reason to do, that not only enables us to do collaboration, but should encourage us to do a collaboration, is the ability to do these kinds of things and to reach out across many, many miles. My whole point with actions, for instance, I mean, even again, referring to the Dakota Access Pipeline. No, we didn't have to have everybody show up in Standing Rock. We all could have done things in our own community to make a stand. Whether it's Dakota Access Pipeline, whether it's police, the use of deadly force by police. I mean, we're seeing some of these things in every one of our communities. We don't all have to show up. I mean, it's not like you got to have a million-man march every time something, every time somebody has a grievance. I think we need to make the statements where we are, because we are all impacted by these things in the very places that we live. But I think the idea that we can reach across so many miles to collaborate and to have these kinds of coalitions, I think, again, shame on us for not utilizing it, and even more. And I think for those of us who are using, whether it's Twitter or Facebook or calls like this, and wherever and however we get the message out, but however we show that there is value in collaborating when we are looking at not just the fight for liberation, but the fight to improve the quality of life that is being denied oftentimes or being impaired by policy. And I think that's the whole idea, because it's, when you're talking about trying to improve the quality of life of a people rather than just our own individual quality of life, that's the liberation that I'm talking about. I'm not just saying, set my people free. I'm saying, look, stop, trying to dampen our ability to improve the quality of our life, or worse yet, stop impairing our quality of life. I mean, and that's what I think what drives me to stand with people who have not just shared experiences, but are facing some of the same obstacles, however they manifest to each group.
It reminds me of an article. I didn't read it because of the headline. An article I saw this morning. I was Washington Post, and it was labeled opinion, and it said, Palestinians have a right to want to be equal. Wait, so they may not have a right? I'm confused. If it's an opinion, it means there's another side where they don't have a right to be equal and be considered to be human beings as well. And just from the quality of life aspect, when you're treated that poorly, one by society, the system that holds up society, it's not abnormal, but it seems that way because of what we're taught by that society and system, to go, hey, like John said, would you stop treating us this way? We just want to live. Can we just live? And you should treat me as a human being like I'm treating you as a human being. And that's where, of course, from the racial aspects of black, native, or colored versus white, there's always a problem because we live in two different realities. One thinking it's either okay what they're doing to us, or, oh, no, it's a post-racial society, Obama won, everything's fine.
So, yeah, I just feel at the heart of this is we can get much further, I think, being genuine with like one another and like with other groups and like working through these conversations than we can not doing so. And I legitimately understand why there might be people on both sides who just might be skeptical about partnering with just anyone. But I feel like I just have seen like legitimate coalitions form in my own lifetime. Like, no, it's not always like on a group level. Sometimes it is just individuals, but I still appreciate those individuals. I don't know. I just want to get the conversations kind of started so that we can do more things like later. But I feel like it's gonna take a while. Like there's gonna have to be like this like preliminary like period where I feel people are gonna want to speak about themselves as they see themselves and like about who they are, because I feel like we've been told about one another either through media or through just very narrow lenses. And I feel like just widening those lenses it's just going to be really beneficial.
We need to learn from each other. It's imperative. Because I say this a lot, even from a selfish standpoint, the more we learn from other oppressed groups, especially speaking of this panel, Black and Native, the more we know about the system and the enemy being white supremacy, because of what they're doing to those other groups. So, oh, they do that to you? Wow, okay, and how do they do that? And then, how do you deal with it? Is there a way to get out of it? And we just swap stories, swap ideas. And that's what coalitions are about, improving ourselves, improving one another. And obviously, I won't use the word ally, Tracy, but creating alliances with each other.
That's kind of the same thing, Nolan. But anyway.
Well, yeah, you're right. That was a form word.
No, but I think one of the things that we have to do is one of the things is understand facts and some truths of history. And I think what I try to do oftentimes is not just offer my opinion, but I try to lay out a certain body of historical facts, or sometimes they aren't that historical. Sometimes they're very contemporary facts, and then explain how that shapes my perspective. Not that my perspective is being offered up as the only view from or representing all Native people, but to say, look, there's this, and this that that I either know of or I'm aware of or experienced it, and that is what has shaped my perspective. Now, if you offer it that way, what that offering is I'm not saying that people have to share my perspective because they didn't necessarily share my experience, but they should know that the perspective exists.
Yeah.
And if that perspective isn't about advancing me personally, but really trying to say that because I understand, and one of my go-to examples of this thing is, that's usually a historical shocker for people is when I talk about Abraham Lincoln signing the execution order for 38 Dakota to be hung the day after Christmas in Mankato, Minnesota, a week before he signs the Emancipation Proclamation. Obviously, understanding that he was not only willing to create the environment that created the trial that would try to sentence over 300 Dakota to death, but then he felt like he was somehow righteous because he said, no, we're only going to execute 38 of them. The rest of them will die in prison. And then get praised, throughout the rest of history because he signs the Emancipation Proclamation a week after this execution takes place. So my perspective about Abraham Lincoln is not just framed by people having, perhaps a different view on what the Emancipation Proclamation meant. I'm saying, well, I know what the execution a week before meant, and so that isn't, that isn't debatable because people want to talk about the complexity of a character, and I'm saying if we back up some of our perspective with historical facts, not just our own view of the historical event, but just what is the actual historical event. I think that's what we can do to share that history. And so when we share these historical facts because they have been buried, when you think about what's now coming out more and more, the true numbers associated with lynching. One of the problems that I have with the book by David Grann, The Killers of the Flower Moon, about the murder of the Osage in Oklahoma, is the fact that takes place at the exact same time that the riots in Tulsa take place, and somehow Grann was not able to connect the racism that the Osage were experiencing in 1920 with what black people were experiencing, in the Black Wall Street of Tulsa. I mean, it's, these are the things that sometimes I have a hard time reconciling. But I think because others haven't reconciled it, I think we have to talk about what is not reconcilable.
Mm.
It's like Central Park. Black people used to live there. We were forced out. But there were people that lived there before us. And that's that disconnection always seems to happen with the two of us.
And the descendants of those people who used to live there are now feeling just some of the most blatant racism in Mahwah, New Jersey, and in the Ramapo Mountains. I mean, those are the people who were exiled from Manhattan. Those are the Lenape, the Ramapo Lenape now, they're called, and they're still experiencing just outright blatant racism, and have so for whether it was at the hands of Ford Motor Company dumping toxic waste on their lands, or whether it's the white people who are trying to assess fines even when they have a gathering for a prayer circle. I mean, it's just absurd.
Yeah. And these are things that we, on our side, need to understand. It goes both ways, and so much of it is ignorance and all the mess that we were taught as children, and the things that we are not taught as children. But I'm thankful and blessed that we have outlets like this Roundtable. I'm thankful and blessed that I know all of you and are friends of yours, and it's an honor to share this space with you whenever we all come together, and it's these four faces, or whether it's others that are just as special and wonderful. And unless anybody has anything else to say on the topic or anything they want to shout out before we close?
Yeah, well, because it's not just here. I mean, because obviously what happens is I get a chance to see some of what other panelists in this roundtable are putting out on Twitter and Facebook and other places. So we get to follow each other beyond this roundtable discussion and share each other's thoughts and each other's messages and postings and that kind of stuff. So no, we've built something even with this little small group that reaches out to many people, and I think education and information is key. Using the technology, as you say, to educate not only our coalition partners, but frankly, the very people that we're trying to stand up to. I mean, there are times that I've been able to completely subdue somebody by just explaining some realities of history and having them, hear what I have to say, and then go back and check to say, what he told me was correct. I perhaps have to rethink the position that I've held against, this person or that person or these people or those people, because, this information and the things that we share with each other and with, with the general public, I think it's important. I think education and information is really important.
Absolutely vital. Well,
I also want to say amen on I am very fortunate to know all of you as well. That's it. I thought it was a nice, yeah.
I'm glad you said it. Well, thank you all for being on. As always, you're always welcome back, and I hope to see you all again soon. I look forward to that day when we share the space again. And to those watching or listening, we'll be back next week. Whoever will be on this panel, they will be wonderful, and we will all learn from each other once again. Everybody have a great week.
Have a good evening.
Thank you, Nolan. Bye, everybody.
All right.
Peace.